Hi, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to learn this evening as Drisha is kicking off our Fall Zman. Tonight, we have the pleasure of learning with Rabbi Helfgot on his series Between Heaven and Earth, case studies of the tension between Halakha and morality. In this class, we will examine case studies that highlight the dilemmas, tensions, and resolutions regarding conflict between Halakha and human ethical sensitivities. We will explore classic and modern rabbinic sources regarding the general issues of halakha and ethics, followed by study of issues such as the killing of Amalekite miners or the status of miners of the condemned city, Hanidachat, the status of the mamzer and priorities in healthcare, the burial of Jews who commit suicide, and other sensitive topics. For those of us who have not had the pleasure, Rav Nati Helfgot is the chair of the Department of Torah Shebal Peh at the SIR High School in New York City. He's also the rabbi of Congregation Netivot Shalom in Teaneck, New Jersey. And he has been a longtime teacher at Drisha from the early 1990s through 2016. As people are coming in, I do see you. I will be sending invitations to panelists. They are a great way to see and participate. You can turn on your camera. You can ask questions directly to Rabbi Helfgot. You can also choose to decline, but it's always nice to see people. All I ask is that if you are not actively speaking, to mute yourself. Source sheets will go out in chat shortly. And if you have questions for Reb Nati, do not hesitate to ask them in chat, whether you're on Facebook or on Zoom, and I can bring them to his attention. And with that, extended introduction, I want to turn things over to Rabbi Helfgot.
Okay. Thank you, Kayla. It's first of all, Shana Tova to everybody, even though it started as a Shana Tova, but it's unfortunately been a very, very difficult time for everybody in the last week, almost 10 days now. And I want to recognize that. I want to make it, clear that obviously things are not normal for any of us, especially since most of us have relatives in Israel, or have close friends in Israel who have, or family who are in the IDF right now, been drafted, or under the gun of the rockets. And so we acknowledge that, we recognize that. We hope that a little bit of our Torah study, we just sang on Simchat Torah, Torat Hashem Tmima, Meshivat Nafesh, it restores the soul. And we hope that we can find some measure of restoration of the soul in our learning. And that's what I'm thinking. I mean, I myself, today I spoke with my son, who's Shana Bet in Israel, who's in the process of making Aliyah. And so it's, very intense. And I hope, again, Hashem Yishmor on all of everyone's relatives and friends and children of relatives and children of friends. And so we should all think and about that. Tonight I want to start. So the class tonight is what I call the foundation. I think Kayla's going to put up the source sheets. Okay, so it should be going up on the chat tonight. I want to start with the foundational question. Before we get into the conflict, when ethics and halakha collide, we first have to lay out a kind of ethical theory. We have to lay out what do we believe about ethics? What do we believe about, the interplay of halakha versus ethics? I'm gonna click on the chat and have the sources in front of me. But maybe I'll go back for a second. Let me go back. See if I can do that, make it smaller and go back to the Zoom. Maybe I'll go back to the Zoom. And so everyone who's clicking can see, if you click, you can have the sources, and I have them printed out for me So I can still see anyone who would like to be seen. Again, everyone's encouraged to show themselves. So I'd like to start at the beginning, which is kind of the beginning of Western history, a Western philosophical tradition. If we go back to Plato, not Plato, but Plato, in a famous dialogue called the Euthyphro, one of the famous dialogues. Plato describes Socrates, his teacher, discussing with this fellow Euthyphro, and he asks him a very profound question in deciding about ethics and God, or gods. For them, it was the gods. And he says, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Which in our philosophical language, we would say is something good or ethical or moral because God, take away the S, because God says it's so, or is it beloved by God? God chooses to do that which is right and ethical, which basically comes down to the question of, is there, so to speak, before God's commands, is there some sort of objective truth, good, ethical, moral approach? Or is it no, whatever God deems is his will, that's all that matters. And there is no such thing as an independent ethic. There is no such thing as, prior to what God says, any value to any human construct. And if you take that latter position, it's very hard to talk about a conflict between ethics and religion, because there's no conflict, because whatever religion says is ipso facto right, ethical, moral, whatever term you want to use. There's no conflict. You can only have a conflict if you have two independent values that are both weighty and valuable and have their own standing. And so when you talk about when we talk about the conflict between halakha and ethics, we have to clarify for ourselves, what exactly is the quote unquote Jewish position? Is there a Jewish position on this question of the Euthyphro dilemma? Is it pious because it's loved by God because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Is there anything per se? God chooses it because it is ethical, or it's ethical, or it's good, or it's right, simply because God chooses. Now, in the Western tradition, this became a very big issue, debates within the Christian philosophical tradition, Augustine, William of Ockham, and others. It is very famously Leibniz, the philosopher. Here we have source number 2. It is generally agreed that whatever God wills is good and just, but there remains the question whether it is good and just because God wills it, or whether God wills it because it is good and just. In other words, whether justice and goodness are arbitrary, or whether they belong to the necessary and eternal truths about the nature of things. Do we say that God, whatever God says, whatever God does, maybe God could be capricious? And in that kind of a world, theoretically, as a thought experiment, if God had commanded us to pillage and steal and murder, that would be ethical, that would be right, and per se, because God commands it. Or is it no? God would never command something like that, because God, by definition, only commands that which is good and ethical and moral. And if you find something that's not, then you have a conflict and you have to figure out how you maneuver those issues. There is no explicit, so to speak, Jewish formulation in antiquity of this dilemma as it is presented in Plato or in Leibniz. The closest that we have is something very late. We have it in one of the writings of one of the students slash chaverim slash colleagues of Rav Kook in the early 20th century. So if you look at source number 3, Rav Kook had a very famous student colleague, Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap, who was an old Yerushalmi. He eventually became one of the heads of Merkaz Harav, Yeshivat Merkaz Harav, after Rav Kook passed away. He also was involved in a lot of teaching of Machshava and Machshavet Rav Kook. So he writes in a letter to a very interesting rabbi. There was a very interesting rabbi in the early part of the 20th century. His name was Rav Chaim Hirschenzon. Very, very interesting rabbi. He wrote a series of responsa called Malki Bakodesh. He had a tremendous correspondence and closeness to Rav Kook, and he had correspondence with many other Gedolei Yisrael, with many other scholars and great rabbis. And he was a person who tried to deal with the modern world through the lens of Halakha, and tried to find interesting solutions, innovative solutions. Anyway, so he has a whole series of letters, exchanges with great rabbanim. He was a rabbi in Hoboken for many, many years in the early 1900s. And so Rabbi Hirschenzon has a letter from Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap in the 4th volume of his book called Malki Bakodesh. So if source number 3, if you look at the source, so the source says, V'agav, Rav Charlap writes to Rav Hirschenzon, V'agav bati lahai inyana, I came to discuss this topic. As a side note of coming to discuss this topic you asked me about, Echtov lo ma shechakarti mikvar, I'm going to write to you about what I've already experienced, I've already examined. It says in the Bible, Dirachea darchei noam v'chol netivotea shalom. Dirachea darchei noam v'chol netivotea shalom, which is a pasuk in Mishlei, in the Proverbs. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all of its ways are ways of peace, which sounds like, the Torah is supposed to be pleasant and good and ethical and moral. So he says, I asked myself, is it that in their very essence, the mitzvot, the ways that God has commanded us, are they in their very essence ways of peace and harmony and truth? But we had trouble uncovering them, and that's why we need revelation, for God to show us how to behave. But really, they are inherently good, inherently just, inherently ethical. Or does the positive and the sweetness of them that the pasuk, that the verse is talking about, only comes after we've been commanded about them. Only because we've been commanded by God, they are right and ethical and good, but not inherently right and ethical and good. So you have a fascinating here. This is a Jewish formulation of the Euthyphro, but it only appears in the 20th century. You don't really have it prior to the 20th century, but here you have it. So where does Judaism come down, so to speak, on this foundational question of whether, in fact, it is does God command the good because it is good, or it's good because it's commanded by God? Can God be capricious, cruel, evil, demonic, or no? By definition, we assume that there is, so to speak, God lives up to a standard that God lives up to of goodness, ethics, etc. And then when it doesn't fit in to our conception, we have a problem, we have a conflict, we have a this, we have a that. Okay, so the Bible constantly seems to again, it seems to me, if you look at the Bible is pretty clear on its assumption about the nature of God. And that is that God does the right and the ethical. And it's not only because God commands it, but it is objectively the right and the ethical. And the simplest place to look is in one of the first dialogue between human beings and God, and that's Abraham and Sodom. When Abraham is arguing on behalf of Sodom, so if you look at source number 4 on the sheets, so after the angels have told Sarah the good news and Abraham the good news that they're going to have a child, so we go from life to death. They now some of the angels turn and decide to go to Sodom. But before the angels get to Sodom, God decides to tell Abraham his plan. And it says there, you can follow along in the English. I published the Hebrew and the English. Now God said, am I going to hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? God, he's going to be a great nation. He needs to know the ways of the Lord. He needs to know, what are the ways of the Lord? I know I've singled them out because for the purpose of, or because I know, it's the interesting debate how to translate that. For I know. The translation here in Svaria says, for I have singled him out. If you take the reading that I've singled him out, so then it's a purpose. I want him to follow the ways of God, which are tzedakah mishpat, what's called in modern parlance ethical monotheism. If you read it as Laman Yidati, for I know that Abraham is the kind of person who constantly demands of his children tzedakah mishpat, and so I have to justify what I'm doing to Abraham, who's Mr. Justice and Tzedek. Parenthetically, if you take that reading of the text, then what you end up with, people always ask the famous question, why did God choose Abraham? In the Bible, it never says why God chose Abraham. It just says God showed up. Lech lecha mi'artzecha mi'ad. It never says why God chose Abraham, which yields all kinds of interesting midrashic. Either he discovered God at the age of 3, or he discovered the God at the age of 13, or discovered God at the age of 30, or because he broke the idols, right? You have all kinds of midrashic solutions to the origin story of Abraham. But if you take the reading, ki da'ati, for I know, here is the explanation of why God chose Abraham. God chose Abraham because Abraham is a moral paragon of mishpat u'tzedakah, and he's the one who wants to pass it on to his children. And so that's why I chose Abraham. Okay, that's a side point. But the point is that God then gets into a discussion with Abraham. So let's continue reading. Vayomer Hashem, zakat Sodom v'Amorah ki rabav chatam kavda ma'od. Erdana ve'ereh k'tzakta ba'ilai asu v'chalavim lo yeda. Vayigash Avraham. Vayomer. So after God says the evil of Sodom is terrible and I'm going to go down and see whether I should destroy them or not, Abraham turns to God. Vayomer ha'afti spet tzadikim rasha. Will you sweep away the innocent with the guilty? Ulai yesh 50 tzadikim toch ir ha'afti spet v'lo tisel aman 50 tzadikim. Chalila lecha mi'asot kadavar hazeh. God forbid you should do such a thing. Lamit tzadikim rasha v'yach hatzik hashofet kol haaretz lo yashem mishpat. Shall the judge of all earth deal justly? Now notice what God's response is to this challenge. To use the term of C.S. Lewis, he's putting God in the dock, D-O-C-K, the dock in England, right? He's putting God on trial. Now, notice God does not say to Abraham, shut up. You puny little human being, who are you to challenge God, who's beyond time, beyond space, beyond ethical human understanding? God does not say any of that. God also doesn't say, Abraham, I can do whatever I want. I'm Zeus-like. I can throw lightning bolts at whoever I want. I can decide whoever I want. God doesn't say that. He also doesn't give him a very frum answer. And like, okay, Abraham, you don't see the whole picture. Abraham, you don't know, what's going to happen at the end of time. When the world ends, you're going to see how everything worked out. I mean, he doesn't give him any of those answers. What he basically shows is that on the calculus of morality, what God is about to do is totally justified. That there are no tzaddikim in Sodom. Sodom is kulo ra. At most, there is a few people, maybe Lot and his family, but there's not a minion even of people who are righteous. And therefore, what God is about to do is morally justified in the terms that Abraham is arguing about. So the Bible here assumes that God can be held to some objective standard. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat assumes that there's a thing called mishpat that God supposedly is, held up to, which of course is buttressed by many other psukim in the Torah. For example, we just read in Parshat Ha'azinu, towards the end of the Torah cycle, El emunah ve'ein avel, tzadik v'yasharhu. God is a God who is loyal and steadfast. El emunah ve'ein avel. There is no evil in his actions. Tzadik v'yasharhu. He is just and proper in everything that he does. Moreover, the whole debate about theodicy, the whole question of good and evil is predicated on an assumption that God, by definition, does the good and the right and the moral, right? Theodicy is based upon three theological principles. Principle number one, God is omnipotent. God controls the world, and he can do whatever he wants. He can stop whatever he wants. He can start whatever he wants. Principle number two, God is good. In essence, God is moral and good. Assumption number three, evil is real. It's not an illusion. If you believe in those three principles, then you have a real dilemma, which all monotheistic religions have, which is called the problem of good and evil, that how can good people or good societies suffer evil when, if we really believe in a good God. Now, Yirmiyahu challenged God, Eov challenged God, according to the Chazal, Moshe Rabbeinu challenged God, all assuming that God is held up to some sort of standard of the right and the ethical, etc. Again, that entire dialogue assumes foundationally that God is foundationally a good God, a just God per se, in human categories, in categories that are accessible to the human rationale, that therefore they can challenge God and say, you're not living up to Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh. That seems to be the straightforward thrust of Tanakh, of the Bible. And I think it's pretty clear. Again, that doesn't mean that there theoretically could be times when God, for whatever interests that God has, might, quote unquote, suspend, to use Kierkegaard's term, a suspension of the ethical. For example, that's how Kierkegaard read the Akedah. The binding of Isaac is read, again, if you assume that God can be capricious and God can be, wanton, and God can be like Zeus or whatever. So then the Akedah is not a theological dilemma, because if God decides that killing children is okay, then kill children, there's no dilemma. It's only because you actually believe that the killing children is wrong, and God is a good God, and at the same time you believe that you're supposed to listen to God's voice and God's commands, that you actually have a theological dilemma, what Kierkegaard calls that, for whatever reason, the suspension of the ethical. Okay, so that's pretty clear. Now let's go back. It seems to me that if we just worked on the realm of Tanakh, it's pretty clear where the direction of Jewish thought goes. In the history of this issue, so it's very famous that in Christian circles, there were those who pushed back. And even though, again, as I say, I think the biblical evidence is pretty clear and points you in a certain direction, there were others who went in a different direction. And this is called, in the language of philosophy, it's called divine command theory, which is that a mitzvah, a command, has the only value in it is because it's commanded by God. It's not because it's ethical. It's not because it's rational. It's not because it has any value per se, moral, ethical. It's simply because God commands it, and to assume anything else is to somehow take away from the notion of the commandedness of a human being standing before the Creator. And so here's a piece from in source number 5. I took it off the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a peer-reviewed Internet philosophy encyclopedia. And it writes on the entry about divine command theory. Many people think God commands human beings to be kind because kindness is good, and that God himself is always kind because his actions are always in conformity. Although this was and still is the most common way of conceiving of the relationship between God and morality, William of Ockham, right, the famous Occam's razor, the same guy, William of Ockham, okay, 1280 to 1359, disagrees. In his view, God does not conform to an independently existing standard of goodness. Rather, God himself is the standard of goodness. This means it is not the case that God commands us to be kind because kindness is good. Rather, kindness is good because God commands it. Again, the Euthyphro. Occam was a divine command theorist. God's will establishes right and wrong. Okay? Divine command theory has always been unpopular because it carries one very unintuitive implication. If whatever God commands becomes right, and God can command whatever he wants, then God could command us always to be unkind and never to be kind. And then it would be right for us to be unkind and wrong for us to be kind. Kindness would be bad and unkindness would be good. How could that be? In Occam's view, God always has commanded us, always will command kindness. Nevertheless, it is possible for him to command otherwise. This possibility is a straightforward requirement of divine omnipotence. The notion that God is not bound by any preconceived theory or any limits on his decision-making. God can do anything that does not involve a contradiction. Of course, plenty of philosophers such as Aquinas insist it's impossible for God to command us to be unkind, simply because then God's will would contradict his nature. For Occam, this is the wrong way to conceive. The most important thing to understand, etc., etc. Occam grants, next paragraph, he writes, that it's hard to imagine a world where God reverses his commands, yet this is the price of preserving divine freedom. He writes, I reply that hatred, theft, adultery, and the like may involve evil according to the common law, insofar as they are done by someone who's obligated by a divine command to perform the opposite act. As far as anything absolute in these actions, however, God can perform them without involving any evil. And they can even be performed meritoriously by someone on earth if they should fall under a divine command, just as now the opposite of these, in fact, fall under a divine command. So he says if God from the very beginning had put into the Aseret HaDibrot, Kain Tirtzach, Kain Tinaf, Kain Tigzol, yes, go and steal, yes, go, that would be what a person, a religious individual would have to accept. As I said, okay, somebody has a question, I see.
Yep, Ozzy in chat. He says that Abraham cannot carry out his mission unless he understands God's ways. Thus, he is not challenging God. Otherwise, why does he stop at 10 men when it comes to Sodom? Or why does he not challenge God at the Akedah?
Well, the first I'm not gonna deal with the second question, which requires an entire hour shir. This first question, I think, is he stops at 10 men because there are already 10 in Sodom between Lot and his family. It's not men, it's people. He doesn't say anything. It's not a minion in Sodom. Anashim, I think, means people. I think there were already 10 people together with Lot and his daughters and his son-in-laws and their children, probably, or whatever, and his wife. I think there were already, and that didn't seem to stop God from doing it. That's what I think. The question of why God doesn't challenge, why Abraham doesn't challenge God at the Akedah is a very big topic, but it is for a totally different shear. Okay, I understand your reading. God cannot carry out his mission unless he understands. Thus, he is not challenging God. I don't see it that way. I see it as a challenge. God, when he says "Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," there's an assumption there that God has to live up to some sort of objective standard called mishpat that human beings are supposed to understand. That's my assumption, my reading. I think that's the standard reading throughout Jewish history of that passage in Tanakh. Let's move on. In terms of the next issue, or the next area that, again, might be a fulcrum to discuss these foundational questions about ethics and halakha, is the whole discussion about tamei ha-mitzvot, about do the mitzvot have rationales? There, of course, from the very dawn of history, there was a big debate about whether to engage in the process of trying to figure out rationale for mitzvot, and this is a big issue. And one could theoretically suggest that this debate is really at its core exactly the Euthyphro question, because at least possibly, not necessarily, but possibly, the more that you speak of God's mitzvot as having a rational basis or to achieve some sort of instrumental end, so then you're positing that before the command there exists some sort of outside value, menuchas hanefesh, menuchas haguf, social cohesion, sexual, cohesion, whatever it is, that you have some sort of goal that is supposed to be attained, some sort of moral, ethical goal, and that the mitzvah is commanded to achieve that goal. The less you push on mitzvot and rationale, you could say that you're going more in the direction of divine command theory, and that you're much more pushing the notion that simply mitzvot, they have no external justification. They're simply justified because God's will, and that's it. Now, I'm not here, and this is a mistake sometimes people make. This is separate from the question of the motivation of why I should keep the mitzvah. Meaning, even the person who says that mitzvot have rationales and have goals and have telos, have teleological purposes to achieve something, they can still say the ultimate source of authority why I should keep the mitzvah is because God commanded it. But God commanded it to achieve X, Y, Z. But even if I think I understand the command and I can achieve that goal in some other way, my sense of being commanded by God, my sense of commandedness says to me, I should keep these mitzvot in that way. The source number 6, which is really the classical discussion around this, and then, of course, it is then developed in Maimonides and Nachmanides, but we'll see another rabbinic source before we get to that. The famous question Yes, teleological means it has a purpose. Telos has a purpose, for the purpose of achieving something. Okay? So, a very famous Mishnah. Everyone, or I hope most people know that in most people know in the Parshat Ki Teitzei, in the 22nd chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, which is chock full of mitzvot, random mitzvot. One of the mitzvot is that if you come across a nest and the mommy bird is nesting and resting on top of the baby bird, you're supposed to, send away the mommy bird before you take the baby bird, the eggs or the baby birds, the efrochim. And the very famous ki karei kan sipor lefanecha, when it happens upon. Again, it's interesting. The Bible says this is one of those optional mitzvot. It doesn't say you have to do it. Meaning, even though there are some people I know who go out of their way to find a nest once in their life so that they'll be able to fulfill the mitzvah of ki karei kan sipor. The Bible says ki karei. When you happen to come upon a nest, this is what you should do. It doesn't say that you have to make sure once in your life. It's like it's like a get. It doesn't say that you have to get divorced, even though that's part of the Torah. No one says that you have to get married and get divorced to fulfill every single mitzvah, quote unquote, in the Torah. So the Mishnah says, "Haomer al kan sipor." If somebody is davening for the Amud, someone is a chazan, and at some point in the tefillah, he says, "Al kan sipor yagiu rachamecha," that your mercy extends to the nest of the bird, because you showed mercy to the bird, that you don't want the mommy bird to see the taking of its baby birds. The al tov yizacher shemecha, and your name should be remembered for all the good you do. Or if you recite modim, you say modim twice, mishtatkin also, you shut him up. You basically give him the hook. You take him off the bima and you say you can't be chazan anymore. Okay? You shut him down. So why exactly do you shut him down? So the Gemara there, you can follow in the English. The Gemara says, Bishloma modim mishtatkin oto mishum demechzik ishtei reshut. I understand why you shut him down if he says modim twice, because it sounds like he is a dualist, that he believes that there are two gods. There's the good God and the bad God of Zoroastrianism. And so you shut him down. He's a heretic. It sounds like if he says, I'm giving praise to God on the good, the implication is, but not on the evil, which is probably connected again to dualism. The belief that there's a good God and an evil God, and somehow if you're only giving praise to God about the evil, about the good, so somehow you believe that God doesn't control the whole world and there's a demonic force that creates evil, etc., etc. But says the Gemara, what's so bad about saying that your mercy extends to the nest of the bird? So two Amoraim disagreed. Rabbi Yossi bar Rav and Rabbi Yossi bar Zivida. These two Amoraim disagreed about what exactly is so terrible. Chad Amar mipnei shemati elkina b'maaseh bereshit. One says because you are engendering, so to speak, jealousy in creation because you're pointing out one animal God had mercy on. What about the other animals God didn't take care of? So you're going to engender, some sort of jealousy. Because you seem to be turning the mitzvot of Hashem in as having some sort of purpose of that they show mercy, when in truth God is just giving us decrees and they're not for the purpose of mercy. So there are those who will say that that second opinion there seems to be what we would call divine command theory, that the mitzvot are certainly this mitzvah, whether it's all mitzvot, but certainly this mitzvah. And if you want to project it to a broader canvas, that mitzvot in general are gzerot, and they're not rachamim. They don't have any purpose of engendering mercy or showing that God is merciful. So this seems to point if you take this second opinion, it seems to point in the direction of maybe what we would call a divine command theory. Maybe there's echoes here of divine command theory. On the other hand, you look at source number 7, a very famous piece in the Yerushalmi. So I'll read it in the English. Shimon ben Shetach was dealing with flax. His students said to him, "Master, leave it behind and we will buy you a donkey and you won't need to work so much." And they bought him a donkey from an Arab, and it had a jewel hanging from its neck. They came to him and said, "From now on, you won't have to work again." He said to them, "Why?" They said, "We bought you a donkey from an Arab, and it had a jewel hanging on its neck." He said to them, "Did the owner know?" Meaning, did the owner know that by accident there was a jewel that was left on the neck of the animal, and that when you paid $2 for the animal, you also got a precious stone? So they said to him, "No." He said to them, "Go return it." Later students objected to the story, but didn't Rav Huna say that they responded before Rabbi? Even according to one who says an item stole from a Gentile is prohibited, all agree that an item lost by a Gentile is permitted. And what's the response of Shimon ben Shetach? What? Do you think Shimon ben Shetach is a barbarian? Shimon wished to hear, "Blessed be the God of the Jews more than all the wages in the world." Where did Shimon know this from? And they tell another story. So Shimon ben Shetach says, you guys are very technical in your keeping of the halakha, but you don't understand. Can't be a barbarian. There is an ethic, even outside of halakha. We don't simply live by what halakha says. And even if technically halakha says I can keep the stone, I'm not a barbarian. If I can live a life of halakha and still be a barbarian. Now, again, this seems to point in the other direction. I said that if you look in the Middle Ages, Maimonides and Nachmanides address this section in the Gemara and Brachot, this Mishnah and Brachot, and notice the direction that they go to try to, again, two different approaches, how to neutralize from their perspective. What I wanted to show, the attempt to neutralize the Mishnah in Brachot is itself a statement about the direction that these two great sages, who certainly represent very mainstream Jewish thought of the Middle Ages, the great rationalists and the great Kabbalists, but Rambam and Ramban are a big, tag team. They're not small potatoes. So Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed writes, the same reason applies to the law. Towards the end of the third section of the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides goes into his very famous discussion about the reasons for the law. And Maimonides is a very big advocate of ta'amei ha-mitzvot, of that people should try to figure out rationales for mitzvot, whether they're historical, whether they're ethical, whether they are social, practical, political, but he's very much in favor of countering what was very common in certain strands of Islam in his day that saw God's will as the only reason for mitzvot, and actually sometimes celebrated what we might call the lack of rationality of certain mitzvot and commands. So Rambam writes, the same reason applies to the law which enjoins that we should let the mother fly away when we take the young. The eggs over which the bird sits and the young that are near the mother are generally unfit for food. And when the mother is sent away, she does not see the taking of her young ones and does not feel any pain. In most cases, however, this commandment will cause man to leave the whole nest untouched, because the young or the eggs which he is allowed to take are, as a rule, unfit for food. So the Rambam has a whole lumdus, has a whole explanation that, number one, you send away the mother, she's not going to she's not going to feel the pain, but also, hopefully, you're just not going to want the headache and the hassle of having to send away the mommy bird. And so instead, you're just going to pass this nest, which has very young chicks or very young, just hatched eggs, which are not the best. The Rambam gives a medicinal explanation for this mitzvah. If the law provides that such grief should not be caused to cattle or birds, how much more so careful we must be, we should not cause grief to our fellow man, right? Very nice musar. If one of the reasons why we don't want to cause pain to the mommy bird, so Halachas kam v'kama, you don't want to cause pain to fellow man. It's similar to the story with Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and the Challah, right? About Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was invited to a very rich person's house when he was visiting a certain town, and the rich person had told his wife, "Oh, I'm having this great rabbi visit. Please make sure that everything is ready and set on the table and that we're ready." And when we come home from shul, and when they came home from shul, everything wasn't ready. The kids had been crying, and it was hard. And the husband started to berate the wife that, the challahs weren't on the table, the cover wasn't on the challahs, and so Rabbi Yisrael Salanter asked this man, he said, "Rabbi Yid, why is it that you cover the challah?" So he told him, there's actually 3 reasons, but he told him the famous reason we all learn as little kids, not to embarrass the challah, because we're going to make a bracha on the wine before the challah. We don't want to embarrass the challah. So he said to him, listen to what your ears should listen to what your mouth just said. You don't want to embarrass the challah, but you're ready to embarrass your wife because of the fact that she didn't have the cover on the challah or whatever. So Rambam says the same thing here. When in the Talmud, those are blamed who use it in their prayer, the phrase, thy mercy extended, it is the expression of one of the 2 opinions mentioned by us, namely that the precepts of the law have no other reason than divine will. We follow the other opinion. So Maimonides, in the Guide for the Perplexed, makes it very clear that he sees the debate in that Mishnah as not just a local debate, but a generic debate about Tamei Mitzvot, about looking for rationale for God's commandments. And if you took the view that said that they are only gzerot, you would end up believing in sort of divine command theory. But Rambam says we follow the other opinion. Judaism, as he understands it, rational Judaism, does not accept that divine command theory, but accepts the notion that God's mitzvot have some other purpose, which are valid in and of themselves, which are part of the chokhmah, the great wisdom of God, that he commands us to achieve these great goals. Nachmanides, in a very lengthy passage, he cites, if you turn the page, I have it over. So Nachmanides, he cites Maimonides, and he says in the middle of that page, he cites, and Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon said, further, do not contradict me by quoting the saying of the sages. He who says in his prayer, even to a bird's nest do thy mercies extend, which would seem to imply that there is no reason other than the will of God. For that is one of 2 opinions, namely the opinion of the sage who holds that the commandments have no other reason by the will of Creator. We follow the second opinion, that there is a reason for all commandments. So, Maimonides continues, and he writes in the bottom, Nachmanides, Ramban, Nachmanides continues, and he says that Maimonides is definitely correct, that mitzvot have a purpose. Now, this theory, categorically stated by Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, concerning the commandments, that there is a reason for them, is indeed very clear. There is reason, benefit, and improvement for man in each of them, aside from the reward by him who commanded it, blessed be who. Okay? Basically, for Ramban, all mitzvot have reasons. Even the mitzvot that we call chukim, it's because we don't understand the reasons, we may not have access to the reasons, we may not be able to find the reasons, but they definitely have reasons, even those mitzvot. And Maimonides continues in in that way. Nachmanides, excuse me. And if you turn the page, he speaks about in the next lengthy paragraph the benefit. We skip to the benefit from the commandments is not derived by the Holy One himself. God doesn't need our mitzvot. Rather, the advantage is to man himself, to withhold from him physical harm or some evil belief or some unseemly trait of character, to recall the miracles and wonders of the Creator in order to know the eternal. And that's when the rabbis say, Lo nitna ha-mitzvot ela letzarif bahem et habriot, the mitzvot were given to fashion the human being. That is not just, for kind of arbitrary purposes. They were given for ethical, moral, political, social purposes. And that's why God commanded this. And here, eventually, Nachmanides himself offers a different reading of that Mishnah, that even the opinion that says that you shouldn't say it because it sounds like you're giving a rationale that the purpose of the mitzvot is to show mercy on the birds. So if you look at the very last paragraph of Nachmanides, he writes, so too, what the rabbis have stated, because he treats the ordinances of God like expressions of mercy, whereas they are decrees, means to say that it was not a matter of God's mercy extending to the bird's nest or the dam and its young, since its mercies did not extend so far into animal life as to prevent us from accomplishing our needs for them. For if so, he would have forbidden slaughter altogether. What says Nachmanides, what the Gemara is saying in explaining the statement in the Mishnah that you shouldn't say Al Kansi Por Yagiu Rachamecha, that God did this for mercy. What it's saying is that that's not a cogent argument, because if God was so merciful on the bird, so why does he let us have fried chicken? Why does he let us take the bird and shecht it? So obviously not so much about the mercy of the birds, but rather, thus these commandments with respect to cattle and fowl are not a result of compassion upon them, but they are decrees upon us to guide us and to treat us traits of good character. So too the rabbis refer to all commandments of the Torah positively as decrees. When the Gemara uses the term gzeirot, it doesn't mean gzeirot without any understanding, without any rationale, without any goal, without any purpose. It just means to say that these are commandments of God, and that we're supposed to do them. And what Nachmanides says, but the reason for the prohibition against taking the dam with its nest is to teach us the trait of compassion, and that we should not be cruel, for cruelty proliferates in man's soul, as it is known that butchers, etc., etc. Meaning, it's not about having mercy on the bird. When I have mercy on the bird, we should all be vegetarians. It's about trying to, within the reality that God permitted us to eat meat and permitted us to conquer the natural world, that we should develop a quality that even when we do that, we shouldn't do it in a cruel way. It's about developing us, not about mercy on the birds. It's about developing our muscle of rachamim, and that's what that opinion is saying. So according to Ramban, both opinions, even the opinion that says that Einon Elok Zeirot, they're not rachamim, what it meant to say, it's not rachamim on the bird, it's a misreading, but rather it's a mitzvah in order to transform us in our behavior. So according to Nachmanides, even the other opinion accepts the notion that mitzvot have a purpose. And again, if mitzvot have a purpose, you're getting much more into the notion that there are these sort of objective categories of good, morality, of social utility, of etc., that exist out there that God wants us to achieve through the commands that he gives. And the most famous example, and the last thing that we'll do tonight, is, of course, the famous comments of Maimonides in his introduction to Pirkei Avot. Maimonides in Pirkei Avot, called the Shmona Prakim, there's 8 chapters. So in chapter 6, he has the famous discussion about what's better when it comes to what we would call, what's better? Is it better that a person should, so to speak, do the right thing because he's internally motivated, or because he's commanded by God to do these things. And Maimonides very famously makes a distinction. If you look on the second page, and he writes that we make a sharp distinction, Rambam claims, between what he calls the mitzvot shimiot and mitzvot sichliot, between the rational, ethical, civil laws, I guess you would call them, and the mitzvot shimiot, the mitzvot that have been commanded by revelation that don't have anything to do with what we would call ethical interaction between human beings. And so for Maimonides writes on the second page, after he quotes different philosophers and rabbis, he says as follows. He says, at first blush, by a superficial comparison of the sayings of the philosophers and the rabbis, one might be inclined to say that they contradict one another. Such is not the case. Both are correct, and moreover are not in disagreement in the least, as the evils which the philosopher terms such, and of which they say that he who has no longing for them is more to be praised than he who desires them, but conquers his passion, are things which all people commonly agree are evils, such as the shedding of blood, theft, robbery, fraud, injury to one who has done no harm, ingratitude, contempt for parents, and the like. The prescriptions against these are called commandments, about which the rabbi said, if they had not already been written in the law, it would have been proper to add them. So the idea is that it is better. It's not that you should have a desire to murder someone. Oh, it just happens to be. It says in the Torah, lo tirtzach, don't murder. A person should develop and inculcate in themselves the knowledge that from day one, a person shouldn't be a murderer, even if there was no mitzvah in the Torah. The Torah is just, so to speak, giving divine command approval to something which is organically, rationally a good in and of itself. It's a good in and of itself. And he writes, some of our later sages who were infected with the unsound principles of the mutakalum called these rational laws. There's no doubt that the soul, which has a desire for or lust after the above mentioned, is imperfect. That a noble soul has absolutely no desire for any such crimes and experiences no struggle in refraining from them. When, however, the rabbis maintain that he who overcomes his desire has more merit and a greater reward than he who has no temptation, they say only in reference to laws that are what he called, this translation, ceremonial prohibitions, what we would call mitzvot ben adam l'makom, like kashrut. Therefore, the rabbi said that man should permit his soul to entertain the natural inclination of these things, but the law alone should restrain him. It's only because God commanded me that I shouldn't eat shrimp that I shouldn't eat shrimp. It's not because I necessarily have to feel that I don't want to eat shrimp. So tonight, what we did is we looked at the foundational question of ethics and halakha, specifically around the dilemma: does God command that which is good because it's good, or does God, simply because God commands it, it's good, it's ethical, it's right, etc., which is a commonplace of Western philosophy. In the Jewish tradition, it wasn't explicated in antiquity in that way, that kind of chakira, that kind of duality, but certainly the issue is at the surface of many of the interesting theological debates. I think that the thrust of Tanakh is pretty clear. I think that the thrust of mainstream Rishonim also very much goes in the direction of assuming against the notion of divine command authority, but rather theory, but rather much more in the idea that God commands that which is good and right and just, because God is by definition good and right and just in the categories that human beings can apprehend. And therefore, that's what allows there to be conflicts and ethical dilemmas. In Yirtzeh Hashem, in the next session, we'll just finish up quickly a couple of other sources here to show you some of the modern manifestations of this debate in Jewish thought. And then we'll get into our first topic, which I have to figure out exactly which is the first topic, the best first topic to start with, and we will then continue. So I want to thank everybody for listening tonight, for learning tonight, and hopefully we will continue to learn together. Yeah. And thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and learning. Thank you, Rabbi Helfgot. If you want to learn more with Drisha, Fallsman classes continue to roll out on Wednesday with Ms. Rachel Gelfman Schultz and Dr. Rachel First, starting at 1 p.m. On Sunday, Mishnah learning continues with Mishnah in Depth, Masechet Yavama with Rabbi Silber. To find out more about our classes, please go to 5784.drisha.org/fall. And I hope to see you next week.
Good night.
Take care.